You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 159 of Life Ruins Podcast, where we investigate the careers and research of those living life ruined. Today, it's just me, no Connor and David. They're off doing something else. They're about to actually start living together here shortly. So David is packing up the bus and getting ready to move to Wyoming to live in Connor's front porch in the good old ethnocynology bus. But today, we have fellow APN host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella from the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast here with us today. Andrew, how are you doing this afternoon, man?
What's up? It's so nice to be here, man. You know, it's just you and I now, and I think maybe you should just drop those other two guys, man, and just the two of us can rule the APN, you know?
Yeah, now that we got rid of the dirt, now it's just sky's the limit.
And we don't even need Chris. It's just you and me, man. We should go for it. Anyway, it's so good to be here, and it's so nice to talk to a fellow podcaster, you know, because in our world, it's like, I'll hear your show or you'll hear my show, you know, and the same is true for the other podcasters on the APN. But like, none of us really know each other. You know, none of us interact almost at all. Like I haven't even met everyone on like the CRM podcast. You know, I've heard their voice 100 times, but I've never met them in person. So it's so nice to meet you, although be it over, you know, the magic of Zencastr. It's nice to just kind of hang out and talk a little bit.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I think I met the CRM guys before we even had a podcast. So I think we met up with Chris at SA Albuquerque, right, just to like sign paperwork before we even recorded our first show. So we kind of got to meet them through that whole debacle. And our first episode with them is talking about the Me Too movement. And me, Connor, and David are like, we are so out of our depth, and no one wants to hear a group of 6 predominantly white men talk about anything as it relates to women in the field of archaeology. So we just kept our mouth shut.
Really?
You know, it was crazy. Who would have thought? And then, I've happened to meet the Dirt podcast in person like once or twice. And then Jessica Yaquinto from Heritage Voices. I had the opportunity to meet her. But other than that, man, it's great to add to the list of folks that we know. In fact, like, because I listened to your show when it started coming back up. And then I listened to it in the car with my mom once, and I'm pretty sure you're her favorite podcast.
Yes.
Because she loves just like how like 30 minutes and how fun it is. And like, and it's just like topics in archaeology that she's like familiar with, you know, as she's like, what's wrong with Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull? And I'm like, well, Kobe, let me explain why this is absolute bullshit. Well, better yet, let's Dr. Kinkella explain it to you.
Right. And I'll do it with a gentle touch, you know, because I mean, I love Indiana Jones, but what was fun about that one is I actually was a double major in archaeology and film. So I can kind of really go deep on the film side of things and be like, look, you know, there's real problems with this movie from this side, just, you know, in terms of a fully functioning narrative. It's just kind of long and boring and moves real slow, you know, so. Anyway, man, I'm so glad that your mom, you know, that she likes me best, man.
Yeah, I mean, like Bob Kelly's her favorite archaeologist. So, I mean, like I'm kind of used to like other people taking the spotlight away from her favorite child. But I was curious about that because you have a BA in anthropology and film studies from UC Santa Barbara. Yep. But you also have an MA in anthro and a minor in theater from, was it California State University? The CSU I'm familiar with is Colorado State. So is it California State University? Yeah,
it's California State University. So that's Northridge. It's in the Valley area of Los Angeles.
Gotcha. So, and then your PhD in anthro from with the Maya Archaeology focus, UC Riverside. So you're like a California boy, like through and through,
I am.
Never got out.
I don't want to know the rest of the world. This is California, man. Isn't it the best place? I mean, that's what Jim Morrison says. Yeah, I took the world's slowest trip down the California coast. So I'm originally from the Bay Area, and then I went to like Santa Barbara, then I went a little lower, and I went to the LA area, and then ultimately to Riverside. So yeah, I have pretty much kind of done a tour of California throughout my life. And I've been very fortunate in terms of just the people I've met and who I've worked with and all that kind of good stuff. So I got no complaints.
Sweet, man. And you're currently a professor of archaeology at what the hell is this place? At
what the hell is this place?
It has a lot of it's a really long, you know, abbreviation here, but it's
no, that'll mess you up. Currently, I'm the full-time archaeology professor at Moorpark College, which is in Southern California. It's part of the Ventura County Community College District, which is super long and will mess you up. So, yeah, it's in terms of the area in California, it's near Simi Valley, or you could say about halfway between Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, that kind of thing. So yeah, I've been there, man. Next year will be 20 years. So crazy.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed the community college system. Like, I'm a I didn't graduate. I transferred out once I realized they didn't have an anthro program, and their historic preservation thing would have kept me there another year. But like, I mean, shit, I went to Northern Virginia Community College, and at that time, Second Lady Jill Biden was my English teacher.
Oh my God.
Alexandria conference. Like, yeah, like, you know, she was teaching community college English when she was the vice president's partner. Like, I've always loved the community college system. And like, the guy that got me into anthropology, you know, he was also the zooarchaeologist at Catholic University in DC, and then like taught on the side archaeology at the community college. And he always loved teaching community college classes over the Catholic stuff, because he said it gave him like way more freedom. He got to interact more closely with students, and he kind of got to do like a lot more in the state than he was able to in DC.
Yeah, it really is the dream gig, I think. I think it's what college should be, and what, unfortunately, a lot of four-year worlds aren't so much anymore, meaning that it's really collaborative, it's really relaxed. My best, closest friends in terms of the fellow faculty are a chemist and a theater person, you know, so I get to know like all kinds of people from all different walks of academic life. And that part, I really treasure that. It's really just fun. Like, I don't want to talk about anthro all day. Like, I want to know like, oh, wow, your chemistry stuff. That's interesting. You know, so I really enjoy that. I enjoy the students. It is, in terms of teaching, it's 5 and 5, right? So,
holy shit. I thought 4-4 was like a full load, but no. 5-5?
5-5 plus I do 6 and 6 because baby needs new shoes. You know what I mean? So that's little extra cash on the side. So I mean, you are teaching all the time. You're doing something like just about every day, you know, and some days, man, doing 3 in a row can be really taxing, you know, with teaching, you know, 3 classes back to back on a day. At the end of that third class, you're just kind of like, boy, I feel kind of loopy. You know, it's like doing 3 comedy shows back to back. It's tiring.
I can't even. So are these all archaeology classes, or do you have to do like some gen eds, like public speaking here and there?
No, it's all going to be anthro stuff. But in terms of what the department needs and that kind of stuff, since I'm the archaeologist, a typical semester would be like 2 archaeologies, 1 specialty class like Mysteries in the Ancient Maya or something like that. I have this section of Saturday classes where it's all day Saturday and we learn real archaeological techniques. So one of those, and then one maybe fill in the blank, like bioanthro or cultural anthro or something like that, where there might not be quite enough archaeology stuff to do. So I'll have to dip out to the other side just for a bit. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But so generally the same students, like this is a 2-year kind of associates level?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's that world. But the big classes, even in intro to archaeology, but even something like a bioanthro or whatever, I mean, there's a ton of non-majors, you know, which I really like. I like being the hook, you know, like, hey, come try out this archaeology stuff. It's pretty fun.
Sweet. I know. And so like your students also go to field school through this, so they can go into the CRM market without. Yeah. And I've always found those students, like when I worked at Fort Lewis College, our crew chief was a current student in the program, but he had his associates from like a community college in New Mexico and had been working CRM for like 6 years. And this kid who recently graduated with his bachelor's, but like he knew more about the Southwestern Pueblo 1-2 stuff than like me and Jesse Toon. Like students were asking us like, hey, what's this pottery? And we're like, no fucking clue. Kagan, what is this pottery? You know, and just like, those kids are so knowledgeable. It's like, if you want to do archaeology, go to a community college and just get that field school out of the way. Yes.
And just that focus, you know, and you really can learn a lot in that little tiny world. And that's what focus gets you. Cause you know, it's very difficult in the 4-year world. It's difficult for anyone, but you kind of go through it and you're like, I don't know, this is all pretty interesting. And you kind of get a general feeling for things, which is fine. But if you want a job later, it's really great to get that specialty knowledge on local archaeology, wherever it is that you may live, you know, because that's where the gigs are, you know.
Right. And California is like pretty insular, like archaeology. Like it's like a whole different world, even within like Western archaeology. It's like if you want to do California based art, you have to go to like a California school almost.
It is. Although recently, in terms of jobs, the CRM firms are suffering so bad, they'll take anyone, who has experience. They are dying for people. But you're right in terms of like the cultural knowledge. It's like you cross over the Sierra Nevadas and then it's its own show,
Gotcha. Well, sweet, man. Now, when you were doing your bachelor's at Santa Barbara, when did you finish that degree?
So I finished that in 95. I started as an 18-year-old at Santa Barbara in the fall of 1990, back in the Kurt Cobain days, and was there through the mid 90s. And then I went to Northridge, right, like 98, 99, right in there. And then I went to Riverside and finally finished there in 2009, I believe. But throughout that time, I would just go to Belize in the summers. The first year I did that was in 1993. And then it was almost every summer after that, I'd go for sometimes as long as 4 months.
Gotcha. Because I was curious, because like my PhD advisor, Dr. Douglas Banforth, got his PhD from UC Santa Barbara. But I think in like 88 or 89 under Jokum. So like you just... Yeah, you just missed him, I guess. Yeah,
I just know his name. But Mike Jokum, I worked with a bunch, and I actually went to Germany with him one summer. Yeah, Jokum's great. Right.
So I'm really fascinated by the work you've done in Belize. And like what caught me onto it was your episode 114 of the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, just titled The Maya Cenotes, because I had no idea. Like just from listening to your podcast, you started, how many episodes have you recorded at this point? Like almost 20, because you rebooted.
I think the first episode was 94 was the reboot, and it's up towards 117 or something like that. So whatever, it's 20 and 23 episodes. I don't know, whatever it is.
And you're like, and you come out bi-weekly. So like every other week an episode drops on a Wednesday.
That's right.
And I've been following your podcast since it's come out, mostly since you started like creeping up on Life in Ruins on our monthly meetings.
Yeah.
We're like, who the fuck is this? Like out of nowhere, you just like popped up and you got this following, and you, Connor and David were just like, wait a minute, it's taken us years to get to this point, and here's Kinkella just like crawling after us, like sprinting, not even crawling. I'm like, what the fuck?
That's so funny that you noticed that, because I had my eyes laser focused on you guys. I'm like, okay, these fools right up here, I'm gonna catch them, and then it just started to go. But I have it in some ways easier because the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast is very palatable to like a wide audience, and that was one of the reasons I started it again, just because it had lain dormant for years, like 5 years or something like that. And they still had a handful of people that would download it every month. And that's why we started it again. Because I was talking to Chris and he's like, we have this one, it's been sitting, nobody's done anything, but people still tune in. I'm like, dude, look, I'll sit in the seat. Let's do this. There's an audience that wants this. So that first push of mine was sort of made possible by a very forgiving and wanting general public, if that makes sense. So I had a little bit of a tailwind,
Yeah, but it was great. And so like, just because you take on these topics of just like, what pseudo-archaeology, but then you also talk about like pseudo-arch adjacent, like your story of the weird place in California where you brought your compass and your friends when you were like 12. And I just imagined it being like Stranger Things.
Yeah, the mystery spot. It was exactly like Stranger Things.
I was like the mystery spot. I listened in and I was like, what the fuck is this episode? But it was so fun.
Those are so great. And I have a handful more. It's so funny when I do that show. I'm like, how many of these can I do from a story of mine when I was 12? And the answer is quite a few. So I would just remember these experiences. And in terms of my age, I am like the exact same age as the guys from Stranger Things, like to the year. So when I watch that show, I'm like, oh, it's my mom's house. Oh, hey, look, my bike. I'm right in there, but you're correct. That place was like that. And one of the things that I try and do to make the show palatable is I have just fun with it. It's like lighthearted. I'm not here to be like, oh, it's so awful what happens. I'm like, look at this story. Isn't it funny? I think it's funny, and to have the audience just kind of come along on a light romp through the pseudo-archaeology world. So that's what I shoot for,
Yeah, and they're so well versed, especially in a lot of the pseudo-arch stuff, and because you have that background in Maya archaeology, which we'll get into in the next segment, and we'll delve into the archaeology more. So you're like hitting on the crystal skulls, you're hitting on the like ancient astronauts, and like coming at it with like this background. It'd be like if David Anderson did like a pseudo-arch. You guys have that same background where you can be authorities. Where like when me, David, and Connor are trying to talk about something, we do have to do a bit of research because we're just kind of like there's no pseudo-arch really as it relates to like paleo Indian or like maize farmers. Like granted, there's like Solutrean that we can all rant about, but nothing specific to like, let me talk about these Maya glyphs and how it's not a dude in a rocket ship. It's like, it's very specific.
No, it helps. It helps. I do try and angle it towards just like personal experiences I have, where I try consciously for one segment to be like, all right, on one segment, I want to talk about how this relates to me, or how I know a guy who did this thing, or how I visited a place where I did see this personally. Because I think people like that first person narrative. But on the flip side, I have to do actually a decent part of background research too. I make like a little bullet point outline of what I'm going to talk about, before I start. I take a single sheet of paper and I kind of put it in thirds, and I'm like, okay, first third's going to be this stuff and second third going to be this stuff. And it's because, like both you and I know, doing a solo show, as soon as you stop talking, it's quiet, even with one other person, you can just keep going all day. But when you're by yourself, you have to have a bit of a figured out plan, of where you're going to land. How are you going to end the show? Right. So I do, depending on the show, sometimes I can kind of wing it and know, but other ones I really have to do some research.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, maybe two or three solo ones I did, I felt bad because the last one I did on like plains archaeology, I was kind of like sick and super sniffly and like making gross throat noises. And all the emails that we had from people were like, that was the most fucking traumatizing episode I ever listened to. Like, whatever's wrong with Carlton, make it stop. And I was like, fuck it, I'm never doing this again. Because I was just like, so plains archaeology, and just people were not having it. I'm like,
I listened to that and it was fine. F those people. Like, it's fine because your stories were interesting. They were honest. I dug it, dude. So, I mean, that stuff happens. And it's like, you know what? We have to put out content every other week. Aren't you guys like every week or something?
Every week we have to come up with something. God.
So that's the thing. It's like, hey, look, it's Carlton on his deathbed, because you have to do it. And so I don't mind at all if that kind of stuff happens, because it's part of the gig. It's like, dude, I had to do it. What am I supposed to do? Not be sick? I'm sick. Yeah. So I don't know. I had no problem with it. I thought it was great.
Fair enough. Well, on that touching note, we'll be right back with episode 159. We'll be right back with segment 2. We'll get into some archaeology here in a sec. And welcome back to episode 159. We're still here with Dr. Andrew Kinkella. And so one of the conversations that has sprouted this episode is like my recent work with Professor Charles Beaker of underwater science at IU down in the Dominican Republic. And then your episode, which I mentioned during the last segment, on your dissertation work, where you were down in Belize every summer working on Maya Cenotes and like doing underwater archaeology in some of the most like rural backwater, no roads, trudging through the goddamn tropical forest with like full scuba equipment and having to like at times sleep outside. Like your story of like, you got your hammock set up, you're zipped up, and then you're hearing like jaguars across the cenote. It's like, what?
Oh, yes.
The kind of Indiana Jones, Mickey Mouse bullshit did you get yourself into?
I think the term Indiana Jones, Mickey Mouse bullshit is really a great explanatory term for that. So, yeah, it was a crazy idea that worked, if that makes sense. Like, I was so fortunate when I first went to grad school. I knew my good friend Lisa Lucero, and Lisa has worked in Belize forever and ever, and we're just close friends, and we work together really great. She had gotten this new project in the Valley of Peace area of Belize, which is sort of central Belize. And we were looking at the map of this place, and there were like 25 cenotes in a line at the top of the map. So there was one cenote every one cenote every half mile. Like just in a long row, because it had to do with, there was like a geologic fault there. So you have these cenotes in a row. And I had just already taken scuba anyways. And I've always been a water person. Like, I'm really good at swimming. I was on the swim team. I was a lifeguard for a while, like all that kind of stuff. And I was like, Lisa, what if I do the cenotes for my master's thesis, And she's like, yeah, that'd be great. And that next year, I'm like, Lisa, what if I dive one of the cenotes? Wouldn't that be cool? And she's like, sure. And so she and I just planned out this like crazy Andrew's going diving in a cenote in the middle of nowhere. And that's what we did. The first time I ever dove a cenote was in, I believe it was 1998. It was me and one of the other students actually had her scuba diving certification, had just gotten it. I only had maybe like 10 dives under my belt at the time or something like that, something crazy. But I will say I was very careful. I planned everything out like really slowly and carefully. And the dive ultimately worked. But the getting there was wild. I think it was something nuts, like 6 miles of walking with a backpack that has all your stuff, like a heavy backpack that has like your tent and all your water and all your equipment, all your regular archaeology stuff. And then on top of it, you're carrying your BC and your regulator and your fins. And then I remember just carrying my tank across my back, Atlas carrying the world style. And I remember that the air I breathed out of that tank was from New Mexico. We had filled the tanks in New Mexico, so I breathed New Mexico air as I dove the cenotes of Belize for the very first time.
So time out. Because my first question is like, where did you fill up the tanks every day? So did you like truck down a bunch of pre-filled tanks from New Mexico?
No. So this project grew as the years went by. The first year was 2 tanks. That's it. That's all. So we only did 2 dives ultimately. The getting there, because we had to like get to the cenotes and sort of map them in the first place. Right. We're in nowhere. We're taking machetes and just trying to get there. And then once you get there, it's like, okay, we're going to do a little archaeology. We're going to do a little bit of excavation, and then, okay, Andrew's going to dive. And then what we did, me and Anna was her name, Anna Alsterholtz. She was my very great dive buddy. And we did one initial dive that we planned out to 60 feet. We were going to look at these certain areas. We came up and then we had enough air. I remember, I think I'd used a little more air than her, that we switched tanks and then did a second dive. Again, the second time to like, I think less that time, 30 feet or something like that. So we didn't go down to the bottom of the cenote. We didn't even know exactly how deep it was. It turned out the cenote was 240 feet deep. So we only went to 60 feet.
That's crazy. So like for everyone listening, like a cenote are these like freshwater pools and these like limestone environments, like Yucatan, Belize, Costa Rica, and like there's some in the Caribbean too. Like it's the same limestone formations. I forget what they're called in the Dominican. They're cenotes, but they call them something different and whatever. But they're filled with fresh water, and they're like extremely important for many of these archaeological and even like modern cultures. Like that's where you get fresh water from in these environments. Yeah. So like I'm trying to think, like a 60-foot dive. So you're going through all that air in like less than 30 minutes to get that deep.
Yeah, it was somewhere in there. I want to say it was maybe about 30 minutes or so. And it was half a tank, right? So it's not the whole, But yeah, so cenotes, in terms of seeing them in your mind, they look like mini lakes. They're maybe like 200 feet across. A bigger one would be like 300 or 400 feet across, would be pretty big. And they vary in depth. The shallowest one I ever worked in was 6 feet deep. And again, the deepest was 240. And they have sheer sides. So even going down 60 feet, there's no place to really stand. You're just going sort of down the sidewall, of the cenote, just sort of looking at stuff, looking for stuff. There were little niches and little crevices, little bits and pieces that stuck out. And on one of those little tiny shelves, it was small. It was picture it like 1 foot by 1 foot. There was a little broken Maya potsherd. So at least there was one. So on that very first dive, we found one Maya potsherd, which is more than enough for proof of concept to say, hey, the ancient Maya threw artifacts into this cenote.
That's bonkers. And so like 2 tank dive, you haul things and your equipment. Like that's a lot, right? 6 miles into the tropical forest. Just do this too quick. Like an exploratory, like how deep does this go? Oh, we can't see the bottom.
Yeah, that's what we couldn't see the bottom.
second dive, it's like maybe something's on the edge that we could see because we're not getting to the bottom of this. It's like a 200, like if it's 240 feet deep, you're talking about like you're going to need like one of those 2 tank packs. You're going to have to switch halfway through, and it's like a 3-hour long dive with a mandatory safety stop of at least 45 minutes at some point. Right. Yeah. Like that's like a plan. That's like a Nat Geo invested project to get to the bottom of that.
And that's what we ultimately did.
Holy shit. Okay.
Years later.
Okay. Explain. Let's go into it.
All right. So I did that initial dive in 98 or whatever. And then every summer after, really all the way until 2008, I would do some version of that where I'd like dive a little more, or I started to find that I could get a ton done with snorkeling because I'm a good swimmer. So I could hold my breath. I could go down like 20 feet. I could get a lot of like the initial survey stuff done just snorkeling. It was much easier to move through the jungle. Didn't have to carry all that crap. But in 2010, basically as the years went by, the story sounds pretty damn good, right? There's this guy out here working on the cenotes. He's diving. Nobody even knows really of these cenotes. And so Lisa ultimately applied for a National Geographic grant, and they gave it to us. And we were able to hire a handful of National Geographic divers, and I got to go dive with them. And that was one of the absolute joys of my professional life, because those guys were so damn good that like they had nothing to prove. You know what I mean? They're not there to not show you something or be secretive. They were like, come over here, Andrew, you know, because they knew I wasn't as good as them, right? They're there to make me better. So I dove with them, and then they went to town. So they dove with Trimix, rebreathers, all the, you know, super stuff. And on one of those dives, I remember going down to 100 feet and staying there. And then watching them, and they had really big lights, like all the stuff, right? And then watching them go all the way down further to the bottom of the cenote. And we actually found that there was a huge cave at the bottom of the cenote that went into the mountain. So I watched them dive down, in and gone. And then I was just floating there at 100 feet in a Maya Cenote. And like, I had my moment. I was like, man, I'm in the Maya underworld. Here I am in Xibalba. Here it is. Welcome to Xibalba, Andrew Kinkella. You know, and I just had that moment. And then I slowly like went back up. So yeah, as the years went on, we got more people on the project, like very experienced divers that would help me out, work with me, search some of the other cenotes. I would kind of do some and they'd sort of do some, but it was excellent having people of that kind of caliber. It's just awesome to work with people like that. You learn so fast, you know, when you work with people like that. So that was really, really thrilling.
Dude, that's incredible. So when I did this trip with Charles, like I only had 6 open water dives under my belt.
Yeah.
You know, like I had like the 4 I did in the DR just to get certified, and the 2 when we went to Sunset Ponds out here to do some work. Mm-hmm. I have over a decade's worth of like archaeological experience. Yeah. So I'm down there trying to teach students how to do stuff, but like, you know, I'm floating as I'm writing on my fucking board. Like I have no control over my buoyancy at that point. Right. The students are all trying to help me like just manage my scuba stuff while I'm trying to teach them how to measure. It was like this really funny like reversal of like, I am out of my element. I can know as much about archaeology down here as possible without that extra layer of like, I can't help them if I can't not be doing backflips trying to show them how to do simple shit.
What's so funny is in my early days, right after I did that initial dive in the cenotes in 98, I think it was the next summer, I worked with Charlie Beaker too. And I was you, right? And it was on, I totally was. And it was on a shipwreck project, but the story was just the same. I came down there to the shipwreck project thinking like, all right, I'll be somewhere in the middle, you know, like I'll be like, there'll be other people kind of like me who don't have that much diving experience, but a decent amount of archaeology experience. But I was wrong. I was like, I by far had the most archaeological experience and by far the least amount of dive experience. So I was like this funny outlier, but I brought, as I'm sure you did too, a certain skill set that was really, really necessary, that was really helpful to the project.
Yeah. No, it was, I am kind of bummed because like while I was down there, I was still working on my advanced. So like all my dives I was doing checked off like an advanced certification of what we were doing. But when we went to the Captain Kidd, which I was really excited actually to work on, they're like, well, there's a 100-foot drop here on this reef cliff. Like this is where you can get your deep dive in. So we're just going to take you to do that instead of work. But I was like, but this is a fucking pirate ship. Like I actually kind of want to work on this. They're like, no, we're doing the coral. And like the 100-foot cliff was fantastic. Like that was easily one of those beautiful moments in my life. And I was like, fuck it. Yeah, I don't need to see a pirate ship. This will always be here. But that 100-foot dive, fuck it. That was incredible.
I think you chose wisely because a lot of times what people don't realize is a shipwreck itself, after having been there for like 400 years and been pummeled by the ocean, a lot of times doesn't look like much. You know, a lot of times you can't even see it. A lot of times it's just like, oh, you see these like rocks in this coral. That's the wreck. You're like, I only see some coral. You know, so
after like we did like 6 different sites and it was all like concreted cannons from like different time periods. Like that's all the shipwreck was. I was like, okay, so I just missed 2 giant mounds of concreted cannons from the 1700s. Cool, sweet. It looks a little different than the bombards I just saw the other day. So yeah, I'll take the 100-foot coral.
No, the 100-foot wall dive is pretty sweet, man. I would do that.
Apparently the guy that started this like World Save the like Manta Ray Conservation, I forget what this organization is, but their whole thing is to save manta rays. Allegedly, the guy that started this foundation did that same dive and saw a manta ray, but it was one of those like his camera wasn't working, so he couldn't get a photo of it. So it's either like the most like elaborate long con to get someone to prove to people he saw a manta ray on that trip. But apparently that's where it happened. So like, okay, so I kept looking behind me in the open ocean, like maybe this manta ray is coming. Maybe I'll get to see it. But hoping. But yeah, as you were saying.
Oh, just, you know, if you're really into this, and I think you know this, the hard skill set to get is the archaeology skill set. You can get better at diving over time. So, and I think Charlie used to say this. I think a lot of people would say this. It's like it's easier to turn an archaeologist into a diver than the other way around. Right.
See, that's the first thing he fucking said to me when I told him I was interested. He was just like, yeah, it's easier to turn a diver into it's easier to turn an archaeologist into a diver than a diver into an archaeologist. Like, sweet. Well, turn me into a diver then.
Yeah. I took his advice even long after I'd left. And so what I would do as the years rolled by working at the Carlton pools and Belize or whatever, I would take classes too. I take like one dive class a year, even if that, where it's like, oh, I'd get my advanced open water. Oh, I'd get my nitrox certification, whatever, you know, I'd go through it. And then ultimately at this point, about 8 years ago, I was like, I'm going to get my dive master certification. And that's what I got. Right. And that was a real feeling of accomplishment because dive master's a thing. The other ones you can get, you know, a couple weekends, you're good. Dive master, you got to put in the effort. It was the last great academic-ish thing I ever did, if that makes sense. I was like 40 or so when I started doing it, even like 43 or something. And I was like proud of myself, you know, and I'm like, dude, I'm a dive master. Like, this is awesome. So I recommend sort of year by year, just if you're into it, you know, you just stick with it and take those classes. Right. And it's really helpful.
Yeah. And like all the students he has down here, like all the undergrads, they're dive masters. And like after we left, 3 stayed to get their instructional certificates.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
So like he has like this mill of like, he takes a student from like freshman year all the way up, gets them completely trained, whether it's in archaeology, biology, animal behavior. He has his little groups, but he makes sure all of them can teach the dive classes, and he has safety officers out there. Like he has a self-contained system. Yeah. And that's why all of his students end up as like this state underwater archaeologist somewhere, or like they work for Texas A&M or South Carolina, where he's making those kids the professionals. And I was just like, I want this so bad.
Yeah. He had that mill the better part of 25 years ago. Like when I was on his project, all the other students were that. You know, they were all that. That's why they were like so good at diving, all that stuff. And I was kind of this weird outsider because, I was sort of like having a moment in their fishbowl. And it was very interesting. That was another time when I learned a lot about diving from those guys. They were very competent.
I bet. So outside of the Cenotes and the shipwreck you did with Charles, what other kind of underwater archaeology have you done in your career?
Those are really the 2 big ones. I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, the cenote thing was kind of like, all right, you know, every year for several years we would be doing that, and that's kind of the one they chisel on my tombstone. You know, here lies Andrew Kinkella, the Cenote guy. The shipwreck was actually in Northern California. It was the Pomona shipwreck, which was in Northern California on Fort Ross Cove. And that is some chilly diving, my friend. Like, that was some chilly. That is a 7-7 wetsuit, still freezing your ass off. Like,
Jesus.
It was so cold. I think I want to say the water was like, I don't know, 48, 50, right, you know, somewhere in there. And it was like, it was brutally cold. That's the main thing I remember from working on the Pomona. It's like, I'm freezing. I'm still freezing.
We did a freshwater dive in like early April at Sunset Ponds here. And it was same kind of thing, but we had the 7 mils on and like, well, you'll be fine. But like your face doesn't have a wetsuit on it. And like, that's what I remember most is like water getting stuck underneath the hood and sitting on my forehead and having the worst fucking ice cream headache I ever had. Like I was
exactly.
I was miserable. I was like, I'm going to fucking leave. And they're like, you just need to wait 3 more minutes. And they were like treadmill minutes of like waiting to go numb in my forehead to feel comfortable.
That's so funny because that your interior monologue is like the rantings of an insane person. You're just like, I'm so cold. I'm so fucking cold. I cannot do this anymore. I am leaving right now because fuck this place and fuck you and fuck you and fuck them because fuck this, you know, and then you stay.
And then you're just sitting there.
Yeah, and then you're just sitting on the inside.
Gradually get better. It's just like suddenly it's like, okay, your face is numb. And I was like, oh, sweet. This is fine. But then you hit that thermocline and just starts again. I'm like, no, fuck that. I'm staying above 17 feet. I'm only staying at 17 feet. Not even going to like splash my toes in there to mix up the water. Fuck that. The cold water can stay down there.
Because your body is just screaming like, don't do this to me anymore. This is awful. And then you're trying to like write something down on like a waterproof paper or something.
Gloves on and it's just miserable. We went up and they're like, let's switch out. Like we're going to wait up here because we did like 15 minutes and we still had like at least half a tank left or like we went in with like 3,200 PSI. We came out up after 15 minutes with 1,600. So we had about like 1,000 to play with.
Right.
And like, we'll just wait here for 5 minutes and then we can do a second dive and we'll count for 2. And I was like, okay, I'll be right back. Just put in my snorkel. And I just like sat below the water with my dive computer above the surface. I was like, I'm not letting my face thaw. Like, I'm not doing that 5 minutes again. So I'd rather just sit here and just stare at nothing for 5 minutes, breathing out of my snorkel and like just tap me when you're ready for us to go down. I'll put in the respirator and sink. It's just torturous, man. And oh God, it brings it all back. That face chill and what you were saying about the ice cream headache. Yeah, it's like right in the center of the forehead. You know, it's chilly. And like a couple of weeks before, it's like, we used to certify students at Sunset Ponds, but it's like doing the mask clear in the water. And I was like, it can't be that fucking bad. I was like, no, I can do it. And he's like, Carlton, do you respect me as a professional? I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. It was like one of those moments like, okay, I guess there is something to this. If like you would rather send students to the Dominican Republic to certify rather than driving 45 minutes in a pond in April. And then once we had that experience, it's like, oh, no wonder they don't fucking do this anymore. This probably drove students away from the program because this is what they thought this hell was. Like I couldn't imagine doing a mask clear when all of a sudden now my eyes are now like 50 degrees colder than they were a second ago. Mm-hmm. It's brutal. I can't take it. On a rant. Yeah. We'll be right back with segment 3. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, and we're right back with episode 159. So, real quick, Andrew, other than the underwater work that you've done, I've always been, maybe always is the wrong word, but since getting to know of you through Pseudo-Archaeology the Pseudo-Arch podcast, you're also on YouTube and you have your own channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology, and there's like some that have some pretty decent hits on there, but you just have these like quick, like 4 to 10 minute videos on different topics. Like, what is anthropology? Like, what is this term? But also I'm curious, like what, because you mentioned this on your podcast before, when you talk about Graham Hancock, like we learned this early with our Instagram page, we attacked him, and we get really weird now when we try to avoid talking about Graham because it's a weird, like he has a cult following, and you have a video. Graham Hancock is right, and archaeologist responds to Netflix Ancient Apocalypse. And like, spoiler alert, like, no, he's not right. You mentioned that, but like, what was kind of like, what was your thought process of like, I need to respond to this Netflix series, but like 2, what kind of responses were you getting from like the general YouTube community?
Yeah. Okay. This is fascinating. This was a really cool, like, anthropological study on sort of behind the scenes YouTube people who are watching this in their, closet sort of thing. So I did that episode, and I will say, thank God, it is not my most watched episode. Some of my other basic ones, like What is Anthropology, thankfully have more hits than this. But Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse came out, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do something funny. And you can tell from the video, it was a toss-off, man. I have my tripod set up in my office at all times. So all I do is I set my phone, on the tripod, and then I just push record, and then I just do it. So I just did this 5-minute like joke about how I secretly had Atlantean skulls in my office, and like I couldn't tell the world. And it's a toss-off, man. And so I put this thing up. And then I check on it like the next day, and I'm like, I forget what it was, but it was like 2,000 hits. That's a lot more than usual. And then it like went up. Like now it has over 20,000 hits. But what's interesting is when I first put it up, for about the first day, the first 24 hours or so, give or take, the responses were almost all positive. Oh, Kinkella, this is funny. Oh, this is cool. Oh, like just sort of jovial, how I thought people would take it, just lighthearted. And then it went really dark after that. And so after 24 hours, after the 24-hour line, it got picked up somewhere, whatever happened, a different clientele was listening, and they went to town. Like at this point, it has way over 1,000 responses. And like 94% of them are negative because they're all like, how dare you, and they just stuff that's in all caps, stuff that's really long. Like people are typing for a while before they push send, just angry about how I'm just this awful person. My favorite part is when they call me a so-called professor, because I'm like, I do get a check every month from this institution and I teach classes. So I'm like a real professor. But it was a massive backlash, and it was just the biggest learning experience. And it's weird, even though it's a laugh, it's weird when that many people hate you. Like it kind of puts a little weight on your shoulders as you go through your day. Like you can laugh it off, and I don't lose sleep over it, but it's just odd. I'm like, can we all just chill? I just made fun of some stupid shit on Netflix. Like, come on, man. Can't we all laugh about this together?
And no matter, and like what's funny is like going through those comments, they're like, this makes me want to, this form of satire makes me think of points. Like no matter how you approach Graham, he's so good at the entrance of every book, every episode is like, scientists hate me, archaeologists hate me. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. It's like he insulates himself so well. No matter how you come at him, of course, it's always wrong. Like you're always doing it the wrong way. And it's just like, Jesus Christ.
He has to do that. He has to have his setup. That's why he starts the first 5 minutes of the Netflix series, talking about how archaeologists are terrible and they hate him. Like because he has to set up the conflict. So whatever you or I say is instantly, oh, you're just jealous, Yeah. Because he has to have it that way.
The only time I got like usually when with the podcast and Instagram, whatever, like we'll get those comments on our feed. But like the only one time I was like really personally attacked, I was like a featured guest for, I think it was Evolution Soup over in England. And I made the comment, like archaeology moves forward one death at a time, that it's the old silverbacks. Like we basically have to wait for these people to die because now they're in control of the conferences, the journals, the editing. And I was like, so we basically have to wait for these people to die. And like people did not like that response. Like,
how come on?
Like, are you fucking like after I set up the whole conference, it was just like craziness. And I was like, okay, look, I'm done. Like, all right.
That is the most tame joke out there. I mean, part of my dark history was I was part of a comedy team for a couple of years. I did like improv, if you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's that kind of show, like team on team improv. So in terms of jokes, I'm like, come on, that is so like fifth grade. Like, who cares? It doesn't mean that it's not funny. It is funny and it's true. And there's nothing negative about that. You stated a fact, like big deal. Right. Yeah, like, so hey, crazy. I got to wait for some people to die because there's very few jobs in here. Like, you could say any of that. It's true.
Yeah,
like
it was.
It's harsh. Yeah. But not really. Cause it's like, if we're talking about cancer's negative, but it's true. People get cancer and die. and it sucks, but like you could bring it up. I don't know. That drives me nuts. Where everyone is so precious and pearl clutching over the littlest nothing.
Dumbest shit. And it's just like goofy. And like generally, like I liked your take on Graham, because it's like one of the jokes that we, Connor and David, have had. Like, you know, if he's right, like, fuck, where's our secret membership and payment to the underground cabal? It's like, we want in. Like, why are we left out? Why don't we get to know the secrets, you know? Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's just like, you know, and I'm like dreading, because I know Flint Dibble is going to debate Graham on fucking Joe Rogan Experience. It's like, Flint, what the fuck are you doing? Like, that is not a safe place or an environment. Like, you're just going to get roasted, my dude. Like, oh God.
I think that's a complex topic. A part of me is like, why not? You know, because honestly, a lot of times the worst critics for that stuff are fellow archaeologists. It's like, oh, they just sit there and go, oh, I can't believe he did this. Oh, I can't believe it. It's like, dude, he's trying to do something to kind of just beat it all back a little. Yes, the possibility of it ending in flames is high, but so what? Can we all just relax? Like, I'm happy he's going on Joe Rogan, actually, but I'm also, I would say, beware. He has to have a really good idea of how he personally casts. That's what I always say. Like, you have to have the right person in terms of how they cast to an audience. And if you cast like, I'm a know-it-all nerdy guy, I'm not saying he casts like this or not, but like, you have to cast as like a chill, like affable, you know, a person, or it will never work, because it is a religion. You cannot persuade people with all your facts the other way. They just won't go for it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about presentation. What I love most about Graham is he always talks shit about how he's about academics, how he's not a trained archaeologist, but he always dresses like a field scientist. And like, it's perfect, because he's still tapping in subconsciously to some of these like visual affirmations that he knows what he's talking about. And it's like, Flint, whatever you like, just fucking wear like a Metallica t-shirt. Like, do not come in looking like an academic in any way, shape, or form.
Dead before you start. If you come in with like a tweed jacket, like, you are fucking dead. Like, you have to come in just chill. Like, I got my Hawaiian t-shirt on, you know, hey, what's up, guys? Anyway, what's for lunch? Right on. This show looks decent. What are we talking about? You know, like, and then you got a chance. But you're right.
Yeah, we went through a whole thing. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Like, I was talking to John Hopes about it not too long ago, because every time Graham talks about archaeology, he always has to slam John.
He hits him first.
He's just always like, you know, the coward John Hopes. And it's like his announcement about debating Flint was like, Flint's accepted, and like 2 paragraphs on like, fuck John Hopes. And it's like, to be determined. It was like, Jesus, okay.
Right. Yeah, you know. Such is life with all that crap. I just wish we could all chill out a little more and have a laugh, you know, but alas, no.
Yeah. But I mean, like, certainly like your podcast gets a lot of laughs. Like, when I listen to it, it's like a fun time. It's very much like, let's talk about, I was cracking up when I saw your episode on like Clovis and pseudo-archaeology. I was like, holy shit, here we go. Like, if you're going to not burn bridges, but it's like, this is an episode that's going to get archaeologists a little wound up.
Oh, wait, which one you mean? Oh, just Clovis and like, it
was like the Clovis firsters. Oh,
yeah. Clovis first. And I sort of try to explain it out, because there are sort of twists and turns in that. But for me personally, you can't be, you know, you can't say that. I mean, you basically can't say Clovis is first. There's some earlier stuff, but not crazy early. Like, the only good, you know, I mean, you know this stuff. Like, the only good stuff in terms of dates, by the time you get to 16,000, you're getting pretty thin. And by the time it's 17, you're kind of out, you know, in terms of, for sure, good dated stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought that was like a really fun, because it came out like just early enough. I think it was like early January, mid-January, when that episode came out of the year, where I was able to use that in class to talk about, like, taught that science communication and public anthropology class to talk about like, you know, even within archaeology, there are these weird, you know, trying to set up these conversations within the field and then to move like kind of outside. Like, it's, you know, there are these divisions and some of this goofy shit, but I mean, your episodes, I mean, they're just a fun time. Like I usually binge them like on car rides. So it's 30 minutes. It's just you like almost on a rant. And like some of these get like the Tonewood debate was about guitars. I haven't listened to that one yet because I was just like, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. But then you mentioned it in a later podcast. Like, I got this email about it and I was like, okay, well, let me go listen to this Tonewood debate. Cause I'm like, clearly someone got wound up about this. And if someone's getting wound up, then I need to go back and
they got so angry. I knew that one would hit in terms of like having an angry audience, because in electric guitar world, that is like this, like to the death debate that they have. And it's like, if you look at the science behind it, you're like, the type of wood your electric guitar is made out of makes no difference. The end. Look at the science, like, but it's a religion, just like with Graham Hancock. Like, they won't let it go. It's like, no, look, an acoustic guitar, yes. An electric guitar, no. They're very different, actually. But anyway, yeah, it's such a funny world. And I'm so glad you're listening to my show the way I always hope people do. You're like, I'm listening to it in the car. I'm just sort of, listening to a few at a time. I'm having a bit of a laugh. Like, that's what I want, Yeah. And in terms of archaeology, when we were talking about how there's these little, infighting groups within archaeology itself, I always say, look, first, can we all have a laugh? And second, I'm Andrew Kinkella, friend to all. Okay. Like, we're all so lucky that we can live this life being full-time archaeologists, that people get to pay us for this stuff. We've all won the lottery, right? So let's all just enjoy our winnings, and let's just talk about archaeology and enjoy it. I can have a different point of view from you, but I'm not going to hate you after. I'm just going to be happy that I still get to do this thing.
Yeah. What I love most and why I did those episodes where it's just me is like, we got like December, I was like procrastinating on shit I had to do, and like went on to Reddit and I was like, hey, I'm a r/archaeology. Like, I'm a host of Life in Ruins. How can we make this better? And a lot of comments were like, we feel your show. It's like, we're kind of outsiders listening into three guys talking or with the guests. Like, we're at that outside circle where we're either like, it's kind of like listening to people at a conference at the next table over. Right. But your show is very much almost like this. It's like you're talking to me as a person, as a listener. Like, it feels way more conversational of like, you're like, very similar to this. Like, it's almost like I'm listening to your podcast right now. Right. Because the way that I listen to it, it's very much like, hi, I'm Andrew Kinkella. Let me tell you about this topic. And it feels like you're speaking directly to me, not like Ruins where I'm usually speaking to my co-hosts and a guest. And so that's what I love most. And like how your podcast is different, because even like the CRM show and all the others, they're very similar. Like, it's a group of people and you feel as an audience member. Whereas in your podcast, I feel as a participant in that conversation, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And it's just because of the setup. I'm a solo act, where I am telling a story. It reminds me a lot of the drama stuff I used to do or whatever, doing that podcast, because I'm basically setting up a show for an audience, right? It's for the audience. When we talk in the round, on these other shows where there's several of us, you're right. We are talking to each other and the audience is listening in, but that's okay. That's the setup of the show,
Right, absolutely.
But it is two different tastes.
Yeah, no, but it's a lot of fun. I'm really glad that you reached out about coming on and we were able to get you on Ruins to have you on it and talk more about it, to hear more about like your work outside of just some of those fun episodes. Like, let me tell you about hauling fucking aluminum tanks to go through the forest, or just like,
I can still feel it in my knees to this day. It was so much extra weight for the human body to carry a long ways. You know how much all that crap weighs. It's really, really heavy.
I was bitching about just moving it like less than 50 feet from the back of a pickup into a boat with a slot in it. And like, I can't imagine like hauling that thing 6 miles, including like the fins, the gallon of water you got on your back and all your tools on top. Like, no, fuck that. I'm not,
it was one of those things where it was so heavy that whenever we stopped walking, you had to make this command decision of, are you going to put anything down or not? Because you're going to have to like you take the tank and put it down. And now you're a hugely heavy backpack. Are you going to take that off and put it down? Because you're going to have to bend over and pick it back up, And so I remember most of the time, so when we stopped walking, I would just stand with all the stuff still on. Kind of the same idea that you had earlier in terms of taking your mask off. It's like, do I take my mask off and freeze my face? Or when you were like, do I go back down into the cold, or do I, or do I warm myself, or do I just stay cold? It's the same idea. Yeah. Like, I'm just going to stay tired with all this crap on, because once I take it off, I can't imagine putting it back on.
Fair enough. Well, excellent. So we've reached the end of the episode. So, Dr. Kinkella, like, what are some resources? These could be books, videos, whatever that you recommend our audience listen to regarding either like pseudoscience or your work in Central America.
Ooh, yeah. In terms of if you want to learn more, I really like Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries.
Frauds, Myths,
That's a great classic book, which I actually used when I was a TA one time. And I think I'm going to do a show on my experiences using that, because that had its own interest. I really recommend that for the pseudo-archaeology world. I, of course, recommend myself the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast. I'm also part of the CRM podcast. And then my YouTube videos. Anyone out there, if you watch any of my YouTube videos, feel free to comment on any of them, because I kind of can see the scrolling comments as they come in. And I do take them seriously. If there's a video you guys want and you haven't had me do, if you have questions about archaeology you want me to answer, I love doing that stuff. I take like audience questions all the time, because I just want to answer whatever people are curious about. In terms of other books on the subject, if you're just curious about the ancient Maya, there's Michael Coe's classic book, The Maya, which I use in class and I think really works well. I think it's easy to use.
So like 2006, 2008?
For The Maya?
Yeah.
It's the most recent one, I think, is newer.
Okay.
So they redid it a bunch of times. He died fairly recently, but they redid it right up to the nub. So that one's good. My textbook, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. If you're into intro to archaeology type stuff, you always check that out. So
that's the name of your YouTube channel and the book that you...
Sorry. No. Oh my God. See, I have so many irons and so many fires. I got it wrong. See, I'm not a professional. Let's be honest. My textbook is called Archaeology is Awesome.
Archaeology is Awesome. Okay. Perfect. And where can our listeners find you on social media, or where can they email you at?
The easiest way to get in touch with me actually is through my YouTube channel, just because I see those comments like right away. It's like, oh, there they are. I have like a Facebook account, I have a Twitter account and all that kind of good stuff, but I have to be honest, I barely ever use them. So Sure. They are there. They do exist. But I'm telling you, the YouTube comment section is really where I see it a lot, and I can really write back really easily.
Sweet. And last but certainly not least, if given the chance again, would you still choose to live a life in ruins?
Oh, hell yeah. It's been great. I am so fortunate for my career.
Excellent. Well, everyone, this has been episode 159. We just interviewed Dr. Andrew Kinkella, professor of archaeology at Moore Park College in California, in that giant state. And keep listening. And if you have always, if you're listening to us on the All Shows feed, stop what you're doing right now. Go into our individual show, subscribe to us, listen there. That way we can get all the metrics for how well our show is doing. Please email us with any questions, concerns, or topics of interest, or people that we should interview. And I think that's our usual closer. Oh yeah, rate and subscribe to the podcast. Always really appreciate seeing those 5 stars, 4 stars, even the occasional 1 star. We really appreciate when people let us know what's up. And with that, we are out. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.